welcome to my presentation. From Weekend Project to Real Customers, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the journey I took with the company that I'm working on at the moment. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. Most of my career, I have been working as a mobile developer. I really love and I'm very passionate about technology. I've always been interested in sort of learning new things, figure out how things work, and not just in one particular technology, but also learning from the different fields. I'm originally from Romania. This is where I studied computer science. And then I moved to Austria and studied their mobile computing. That's how I started with mobile development. And for the last, I would say 8 years, it sounds a little bit much when you put it like this. I've been working for different companies here in Germany, in Munich. Most of them have been startups. And since April this year, I'm full-time working on my own startup with two other co-founders, which has been really exciting and which is going to be the topic of my presentation for today. A little bit maybe about the things that I do outside of technology. I'm really passionate also about sports, and I like going hiking, and now I'm recently a dog mom, so I really enjoy the walks with my dog. Since I mentioned that I started working on my own company, the company is called mila.health. And before we jump into the technical details, I would just want to give you a quick idea of what we do at the company and what it is about. So what we want to do is provide employees in a company with a safe space to work on their mental health. We believe that working on our mental health is as important for our quality of life as working on our physical health. And we know that everybody's struggling with something, and we want to sort of work against the stigma about talking about mental health, and also asking for help and asking for support to work on your problems. We think it's normal to talk about challenges because everybody's going through something. And this is a topic that's very close to my heart, and I think it's very, very important, especially now in this situation where so many people are at home alone, maybe far away from their families and so on. For you to get an understanding of what we offer at the moment is we offer one-on-one sessions with Mila experts. They are psychotherapists. So you go through a small survey, let's call it, and then we match you with one of our experts, and then you have a one-on-one session with them. This happens through video call on our platform. And the second part the second part of services we're offering right now are trainings that you can work on yourself. The content is developed by our experts, and there's a bit of content and also then a bit of exercises where you can reflect and apply those advices or those tools to your problem. And these are topics like stress, anxiety, maybe assertiveness, and things like that. What we will go through today, we will basically cover the journey that I've been on since the beginning of Mila, and how things change and evolve technically. So we're going to look at the technical side of it. Coming from mobile development, I will tell you how it was for me to get into web, and also how the backend infrastructure looks like and how it evolved throughout the time at Mila. And we're just going to talk a little bit about building a CI system and also automating the infrastructure. Since these are quite some topics, I would like to ask you now to maybe let's take 1 minute, and maybe you can tell me what your expectations are for this talk, or what are the topics that you're most interested in, and I will make sure I focus a little bit more on those details so that you get the most out of this talk. So if you could just pop it into the chat, and I will also take a look at it. That would be great. Okay, so the CI platform, the CI pipeline, the backend infrastructure, automating, starting a career, backend and automating. That's pretty nice. So web development, investors. We can talk about that at the end. Okay. Yeah, learning React. Okay, nice. That's makes me happy because it sounds like the topics that I was gonna cover in the talk. So okay, thank you so much for that. Now that I know what you're expecting, let's start. Let's jump in. So basically, how this whole journey started. Once I met my co-founders, the first project that we worked on together. So we're 3 co-founders. I'm not sure if I mentioned in the beginning. The first project that we worked on together was actually the website. So a website where we would present our solution and we would explain the benefits for companies and also for employees. Here we decided to start with WordPress. The reasons for that were that there's already so many themes for WordPress, and we found one that matched our vision of the design. So we thought it would be quite nice that we already have that in place and we can start building from it. And it seemed like it's not going to be that much effort to have a website ready rather soon. WordPress has this restriction where to install your own themes, you kind of need to pay. So we didn't really want to do that kind of investment in the beginning, just to try it out. So after a little bit of research, and I was at the time already kind of into AWS and infrastructure, we decided to host it ourselves on an EC2 instance on AWS. An EC2 instance is basically just a server that you can configure and have it run. You can get SSH access to it and then you have it run your code and have access to it. I worked on this setup and not so far into it. We kind of had let's say a version of the website already working, but you know, there's always this 80-20 rule. We got to the 80% of the, let's say, of the desired outcome, but these 20% details were really hard on us. That's when we started running into problems. I was installing a lot of, let's say, plugins on WordPress. The server was starting to run out of memory. This Elementor design was not so flexible, like you couldn't use any CSS. You couldn't place the elements exactly where you wanted them to. So there were kind of problems with speed and with the lack of flexibility in our setup so far. While I was working on the website, this was, let's say, already the end of last year. I was thinking ahead on what we were going to build together, and I realized that web is going to be the platform that we're going to start off with, and for that I needed to learn some web development. My mobile development skills were really not enough. So after doing a short research and asking around some of my developer friends, I came to the conclusion that React would be a good option for me. And I enrolled in a Udemy course to learn React and to get into the framework. I didn't really want to just Google everything and figure it out. I wanted to get like a structure from someone experienced so that I skip over maybe some of the beginner mistakes. While I was doing this course, as the project to follow along with the course was basically the first version of the Mila app. Well, yeah, learning React, obviously. Sorry about that. I think there's some sort of post guy. Yes, while learning React, obviously you have to make a design and align things. And I did know some CSS before, but actually it was very difficult for me to set things up in the right way. And I realized that there are some skills here that are missing, and just Googling for the right answer was not really enough, and things were starting to get really frustrating for me. So I decided this is also a skill that I need to be able to bring my best to the project. So I actually spent some time learning it from scratch and learning how you're supposed to think about it, how you're supposed to architect it, how you're supposed to reuse elements, and so on. The course that I followed talked about SCSS, which is like a framework on top of CSS that makes it easier to define variables, to reuse code. And it also talked about how to position elements, which was also a big part of my frustrations so far. And actually learning Flexbox was really a game changer for me. So spending the time to really dive deep into this topic, I think it was one of the best decisions I made, because the practices and the theory that I learned there, I applied throughout the project, and it's still there today, which is very nice. The skills, they're very important skills for me at the moment. So using these new skills, I was able to improve the setup of our website. So while we had this WordPress instance running, seeing how easy it is to develop things with React and with basically making it on your own, it seemed that the setup that we had was very sort of time consuming and really not performant at all. So I decided it makes sense to rewrite the website using React and the skills that I just learned. So I started, rewriting it. It took me about a week or so, but in the end, the setup looked a lot simpler. So we had just a static website hosted on an S3 bucket. An S3 bucket is just a place where you can sort of host files, but can also serve as a static web provider. And through this setup, I was able to get rid of so many infrastructure points. Like there was no server anymore, there was no database anymore, and there was just this statically deployed website that I understood, and it was easy enough to change, and where I was in control of, which was very nice. While rewriting this, I obviously also had to re-implement the style that was in the WordPress theme that we were using. But doing that with my new CSS skills was actually not that hard. And it had even another benefit, that once this CSS setup was done for the website, it actually made it easy for the web app that I was just working on. It made it easy for me to import it there and basically already have a web app that has sort of like consistent design with the website, that was using the same style of buttons and the same headlines and stuff like this. So it was actually pretty nice. And I think it was, a good decision to invest time to rewrite it and then be able to reuse this. All the CSS that I did in the beginning is still in place today, so there were not so many changes there. There's probably some things that I could maybe write in a more concise way, but most of the things are still there. While learning web development and working on the React app, as a newbie to the web development field, I was feeling kind of insecure. And while it was a lot different than in my normal work as a mobile developer, where I had so much experience that I could tell if things are right or not right, with web development, I was constantly reading about it and like asking people about it. I was asking my colleagues at work, like, how do you do this? How should I do this better? And in all these discussions, TypeScript was something that came up quite a lot. So after doing some research on it, I decided it makes sense to integrate it in the web app as well, the one that I was developing. This is also a decision that I'm very happy with. My approach to change, I was already, so at that time, there was already some code in the web app. As I mentioned in the beginning, since we were going to offer video call, that was one of the first things that I started working on, because I never did it before and it seemed quite complex. So that part was already sort of in development. And my strategy to switch to TypeScript was mostly rewriting the smaller components and writing everything new with it, but I didn't completely rewrite everything. I think you also need to make, once you decide on a technology, you also need to make a decision to see how much effort should you invest in sort of migrating to it, or if it's still okay to keep the old one for a while. Actually, these parts that are not in TypeScript, that are still in JavaScript, which are, let's say, one of the oldest parts of the app, they are kind of my technical debt in the project. And I'm looking forward to the chance of rewriting them at some point. For me, TypeScript, what brought to the project was more structure. It sort of forced me to understand better what I was doing. And it also provided all these type checks, like you have to define the type of your method arguments and of your properties and of your constructor elements. And with this definition, it sort of acted like a live documentation for my code, which was pretty nice and helpful, as in the beginning there's so many moving parts at once. So as you can imagine, maybe until now, the web part was starting to look pretty good. But obviously you cannot have a product with just an interface. It needs some brain behind it. So the next part was going to be building some sort of backend for the product. Since I was already working on AWS and at the side also like learning about it and being interested into the whole DevOps topic, I continued to build on AWS. The initial decisions that I made included sort of going serverless. That means there is no server running your code, but Amazon provides this thing called Lambdas. You just provide them with the code, and whenever it's necessary, so whenever you're calling your function, they spin up an instance for you, download the code, run it, and then give you the result. It sounds a lot more complex, but it's actually, it can be a lot more performant than having a server running all the time, because you only run it when you need it. And in terms of security, you also don't have one single instance that can be hacked or that you need to protect, or Amazon takes care of all that for you. They allow the code in Lambdas to be written in various languages. I chose Python because I was familiar with it, and I already knew some stuff. And yeah. One other major decision that I made in the beginning was to use as many managed services on AWS as possible. So because I was the only technical, or like the only person developing in the team, it was important that my effort gets invested towards developing the product itself and not having to reinvent things that are already there, like another OAuth implementation or something like that. So I try to use as many services that AWS provides as possible. Stuff like CloudFront for serving the websites, Route 53 for the DNS services, API gateway for API definition. So for a REST API, it also integrates very well with Lambdas. And they also have this service called Cognito, which basically provides you a full managed authentication service. So you can have multi-factor authentication, you can have email confirmation, user signing up with their phone number or with their email, and a lot of different options that if I had to implement it myself, it would have taken me years. So we would probably never have this presentation. This is how my setup looks like in the beginning. On the left side, there's the setup of the website. So as I mentioned, there's Route 53 for the DNS records, and there's a CloudFront distribution. This makes it's a service that makes your website very fast available to many different places in the world. It's like a content distribution network that Amazon takes care of, and they optimize it for you. And there's this S3 bucket, as I mentioned before, which was holding the static web application and also the static website. And this was updated with the code that was in a GitHub repository. So far, the updates were manual, so I was always uploading the files, just copying them. On the right side, you can see the initial sort of data flow. So as I mentioned, there's these two major services that I was using: Cognito for authentication, so for login and authenticating all the requests, and API gateway that defines the API structure. So you can say, I have an endpoint / sessions that connects to this Lambda function, and that then in the Lambda, you get all these parameters. You can process the request and return something. My initial setup also included my SQL database in AWS. That's an RDS database. I made this decision because this was the only type of database that I knew, but not much about it. Well, obviously, as everything that's the first version, it was not perfect, and there were many things that I could improve. One of them was that sort of the connection to the database was not really optimal. There are some restrictions to these RDS databases when you want to communicate with them, and connecting the Lambdas to it would have to place them in a private network that wouldn't have access to the outside world, like to the internet, and that made it impossible to communicate with other Amazon services like SQS or SES for sending emails, or or just communicating to the internet in general. Like we were using for the video call the Twilio API, and that's basically you have to make some requests, and you have to be able to do that. Having to work around these shortcomings came up, or like resulted in a very complicated setup where security was a very fuzzy thing. I was not sure if everybody could access the database, if everything is set up correctly. And yeah, usually when things are so complicated, like also with the website in the beginning, it means that something is kind of terribly wrong. So I went around and I talked with some people that had a little bit more experience with AWS, and I decided it's a good idea to switch to DynamoDB. This is another managed service from AWS, and it's a NoSQL database that can be accessed sort of by everybody, like with the normal Amazon access management policies. It provides a flexible schema, because obviously our data structure would change. I always try to keep this in mind, that our data structure would change over time, because it's just how it is with projects that are just starting. Security was not so much as a black box anymore because Amazon takes care of it. And as long as you manage the permissions correctly, you're safe. And the setup with Lambda was much simpler. So like the connection is, the integration is seamless, and you didn't have to do anything very complicated. There's a few more good things about DynamoDB, that it's easy to set up tables for different environments, and out of the box, it provides auto-scaling options, so you don't have to manage the number of connections to your database, or it can just go up and down when you have surges in your application, and it can just manage that for you. At this point, we were getting close to launching. And as I mentioned, we were offering these one-on-one sessions with the Mila experts. That meant that there needed to be an interface for the users, but also an interface for the experts so that they could connect with each other. That meant they had to be two different web apps. We couldn't really give the same interface to the experts because it wouldn't make sense. And apart from this, to manage the sessions that the users are going to have, there was one option to just edit things in the database, but I'm sure that if any one of you that has experience with that, like changing things in the database, knows how wrong things can get, and how difficult, or like you can get into very unstable situations. So I decided it makes sense to also have some sort of an admin portal where the things you can change are limited and somehow structured. This meant that from the same code base, from the web app, we had to build 3 different apps. And I did this by using environment variables in the build scripts. So there's, let's say, 3 different build scripts set up. One is expert true, the other one is admin true. And depending on that, you can load different pages as like the home screen or as like the video call, but it also allows you to use the same screen if that's the case. So now we're actually through the timeline at the release date. After, let's say, 2 or 3 weeks of working almost nonstop, we went live and we started having the first real users coming in. And once we had this, it was clear that if we wanted to, or like we needed to continue developing, but we also wanted to do it in a way that doesn't affect the users. And for this, we needed to have different environments for, like, I call them demo in production. Maybe you called it something else in your case. It was very important to me that we deliver quality code to our users and that we don't deliver untested things. So that was the next thing that I sort of put in place. I will show you how the setup looked like. As I mentioned, there were basically 3 different apps. We had them sort of duplicated for each of the environments. So there was a demo app for user, demo for expert, and so on. And each one of them they were all communicating to the same API, but like different versions of it. That was connected to the same Lambda function, also with different versions of it. And in the end, connected to the same database. In some cases, could be different tables. So for example, the users were shared across the environment, but the sessions, it wouldn't make sense to share them across the environments. So in the end, or around this time, I had to manage 6 different apps, which you can imagine, but that by manual deployment, it was, not doable. So the next step was obvious, setting up a CI that would first automate the deployments and later maybe do some automated checks to make sure I'm not making so many mistakes while working on the project. These checks later included running the unit tests and having this zero warning policy on the project, because I think that's very important, especially when I was just starting, and it's good to have the best practices implemented, and if you can have automated checks for it, why not? Yeah, this is how the flows look like for the web app. So you can see something like let's say a Git flow. The main branch is the master branch. Any commit that gets pushed there gets built automatically and deployed to all 3 demo apps. And for the actual production apps, there's 3 separate other branches that go that can be deployed independently, because maybe you just want to release a fix on the user, but you don't want to release the other ones, so that there's this flexibility to deploy things independently and not all at once. By this state in the let's say the journey, this is kind of where we were, or where the project or the environment was at. There were the 3 React apps. There was this one API gateway that I mentioned, which had 2 different stages for the different environments. There was the authentication service, the Lambda, and the Dynamo DB. The deployments to the web apps, they worked quite well. So like the CI flows that I showed you before, that worked really nice. But the one thing that was kind of difficult was the fact that they were sharing one API, and changing that API. So I always had to keep it in sync and always test it on the 3 different places, because they could impact one another. And one more thing that was kind of difficult, or let's say a little bit more complex, was setting up all the endpoints. I'm not sure if you are familiar with the AWS console, but basically you log in and you can just click there and write the name of the endpoint, and just like you click and click and click, and hopefully at some point it sort of works and you can connect to your endpoint. But I was implementing one endpoint, let's say every 2 weeks, and every time I had to Google again and again, how do you do this? Why is it not working here? So there was a lot of manual configuration and a lot of clicking around. And this sort of made it clear that I needed to do something about it. I have been thinking about automating the infrastructure with Terraform for a really long time, but it was quite intimidating. Like, it's much easier to click around than to actually have to express everything in code. I thought I don't know enough to do that. And, but there was a point in the development where I realized that I'm starting to make decisions, not based on what's the best technical solution, but actually on how difficult it is to click through the interface and implement the new endpoint. So I was saying, oh, let's add a parameter here instead of putting a new endpoint, because it's much easier, but it was not the right solution. So there was one time where I could invest effort into starting with this. And yeah, this is still let's say a work in progress. I did learn a lot of more stuff, because you have to be so specific with your definitions. But Terraform also allows you for a modular approach, so you don't have to write every single endpoint definition over and over again, but you can actually reuse it. And the same way, you can have different setups for like your demo and your production infrastructure. And as you can see here on like the small sample code that I put, this is the only configuration that you actually have to do between the different environments. So just defining the different names, or maybe the different tags or the different prefixes, and the rest you can just reuse. And I think that's pretty nice. It makes you feel quite powerful, and also I think much more in control. This is where finally, please hang in there with me. This is basically almost done. This is how the infrastructure looks like, or like one part of it after starting to automate it. The user and the expert app, they have their own API and actually 2 different versions of it, a demo and a production that can be deployed independently. They can have different endpoints to it, and they are connected also to different versions, or like to actually completely different Lambda functions, which can also again be deployed independently, and they're not connected to each other. And another thing that automating the infrastructure allowed me to do was extract the admin into like a separate part. And because this has so many different so many different rights than all the other apps, like you can see all the sessions and you can see all the details, definitely needs to be a much more secure or not secure, but much more restricted environment. So it also has its own APIs and its own Lambdas, which is pretty nice. They can all be deployed independently. And obviously at the moment, there's a lot more of these little boxes around, but I didn't want to overwhelm you with it. Okay, so this is, it's almost done. I hope you're still there with me. What I would like to share with you now is a few points that have become obvious to me, and I hope you take them away from my presentation. And if you're in maybe one of these stages that I explained, or you're going to be in the future, that you consider them and that they maybe help you out in making decisions. First one, which I really hope it came through through my presentation, is that nobody gets the right solution from the beginning. It's just not possible to know everything from the start unless you did it before, but we take that let's say out of the question for now. It's always, you can always choose an iterative approach. Start somewhere, and as you fill in the gaps and you get more experience, you're gonna refine your solution and you're gonna get better. Second point that I would like to mention is that it's important to follow best practices for software development. Even if you're the only one in the team, it's very nice to have a history, a Git history to look through. It's very nice to have automated deployments and not have to worry about it, like not have to sweat it out every time you need to make a change. And it's really gonna, investing time in that is really gonna pay off in the future. And you can basically anytime have someone else joining you, and they will still get what's happening and what things are. As my change with the database, which actually happened 1 day or like 2 days before the release, I would advise you to not be afraid to make radical changes. Once something doesn't feel right, look into it, ask for help, and then start working on it without like being afraid that it would take a long time or it's very difficult. The longer you wait, the more effort it's gonna take to get there. Yeah, my last point is start small. Start with one course, start with one project, start with this one page, and take it from there. And as soon as you start building something new, keep an open mind and don't get too attached to what you're already built, but try to see the big picture and see, keep an open mind and see the options out there. Okay. And with this, I'm going to end with a nice quote that says, "A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step." And I hope you like the presentation. I thank you so much for going through this journey with me and allowing me to sort of reflect on this. It's been really nice.